The office was busy as usual the next morning. Phones rang, printers buzzed, and people moved quickly between desks. But in one quiet corner, the man everyone called the pianist worked with calm focus, typing numbers on his screen as if the noise around him didn't exist. He looked like he always did: simple shirt, quiet expression, and that same old bag sitting by his chair. But inside, something had begun to shift. He didn't know it yet, but his music had already reached places far beyond that small restaurant. The song he composed weeks ago had been picked up by a well-known singer overseas. It was now playing on radios, used in short videos online, and shared by thousands of people who didn't even know who the real composer was. At the restaurant, the old owner told him one evening, "Your song is everywhere, son. I heard it on the radio this morning." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "It can't be mine. It must just sound similar." But the old man nodded. "No, it's the same melody. You wrote that one. The one with the soft beginning and the long piano break." He stopped playing for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. A strange feeling filled his chest. Half disbelief, half excitement. Could it really be true? Could his music be reaching people without him even knowing? That night, after closing the restaurant, he searched online. And there it was, his song. The same melody, the same rhythm, only now sung by a famous artist. His name wasn't on it, of course. He had sold it under a different name for a small fee, never imagining it would become something big. He sat there in the quiet, staring at the screen. He should have felt regret, maybe even anger, but instead he smiled. At least the music was out there. That was all that mattered. The next day, as he sat at his desk, a group of coworkers were watching a video on one of their phones. They were humming the song. One of them said, "This tune is everywhere now." So calming. He heard them but said nothing. He just kept typing, though inside he felt a small spark of pride. He had written that song, and it was now making people happy, even if they didn't know it was his. Around that time, the boss's daughter began visiting the office more often. Every time she came, she noticed him working quietly. Something about him had started to interest her. It wasn't love, not yet. It was curiosity. He never tried to impress anyone, and that alone made him stand out. She couldn't forget the way he said, "You might regret those words someday." It echoed in her mind now and then, especially when she saw how focused and calm he always seemed. One afternoon, she walked past his desk while everyone was out for lunch. He was alone, headphones on, listening to something while writing on a small notepad. She stopped nearby, pretending to check her phone just to listen. She could faintly hear the music. It was soft piano, beautiful and full of feeling. "Is that your song?" she asked suddenly. He removed his headphones, a bit surprised to see her standing there. "Yes," he said, "just something I'm working on." She smiled slightly. "It's really nice," he nodded politely. "Thank you." There was a short silence. She wanted to say more, but didn't know how. She wasn't used to talking to people who didn't already try to impress her. So she just said, "You should share it somewhere." "People might like it," he smiled faintly. "Maybe one day." As she walked away, she found herself thinking about him again. He was so different from the others, humble, quiet, almost mysterious. That evening, she mentioned him to her father without naming names. "Dad, do you think people who start small can really become successful someday?" Her father laughed kindly. "Of course. Success doesn't ask where you start. It only looks at where you finish." His words stayed with her. At the restaurant that night, more and more people started showing up. Someone had posted a video of him playing online, and it had gained attention. People commented things like, "Who is this pianist?" And "His music feels like a story without words." He didn't even know about the video until a young couple approached him one evening and said, "We came because of the video online. You play beautifully." He thanked them shyly, not knowing what else to say. Within a week, the small restaurant was busier than ever. People came to eat, but more than that, they came to listen. The old owner smiled proudly every night, saying, "You see, the world finds talent in its own way." Back at the office, rumors began to spread. Someone recognized him from the viral video and told the others, "Hey, isn't that our guy? The quiet one from accounting?" The news spread fast. Suddenly, everyone who used to laugh at him wanted to know more. "Is it really him? He's actually good. I can't believe it's the same guy." Even the ones who had made fun of his simple clothes now tried to start conversations with him. They would say things like, "Hey, you're famous now," or "You should teach us to play sometime." He just smiled and continued with his work. He didn't let it change how he treated anyone. The boss's daughter, however, saw things differently. When she found out it was truly him, she felt something twist inside her. Guilt. She remembered how she had laughed that day, how her words had made the whole office mock him. It didn't feel funny anymore. That afternoon, she waited near the elevator as he was leaving. "Hey," she said quietly when he walked by. He stopped. "Yes?" she hesitated. "I saw the video. You play beautifully. I didn't know you were that talented." He nodded. "Thank you." There was another pause before she said, I'm sorry for what I said before. I shouldn't have made fun of you." He looked at her kindly. "It's all right. People often laugh before they understand." His words were simple, but they hit her deeply. She didn't know what to say next. He smiled politely and walked away, leaving her standing there feeling small but strangely inspired. That night he sat by the piano again, thinking about how life had quietly changed. The same people who laughed at him were now clapping for him. The same woman who once mocked him had apologized, but none of that made him proud or bitter. He just felt grateful. The restaurant owner came up to him and said, "A journalist called earlier. They want to do an interview about you." He looked surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because your music is everywhere," the old man said with a laugh. "They want to know the man behind the piano." He thought for a moment. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "Ready or not," the owner said, "the world seems to be ready for you." The following week, a small article appeared online about the mysterious pianist who played at a tiny restaurant. They didn't mention his real name, just his stage name, the one he used when composing. But even then, some of his office coworkers put the pieces together. Suddenly, he wasn't invisible anymore. People greeted him with respect now. The same ones who once teased him now complimented his work. But he stayed the same, calm, humble, and focused. The boss's daughter, however, couldn't stop thinking about him. Every evening, she listened to his songs online. There was something about his music that made her feel emotions she hadn't felt before. Soft, deep, and real. She decided she wanted to see him perform in person. One evening, without telling anyone, she went to the restaurant. It was crowded and the lights were warm. She sat quietly at a corner table as he began to play. The music filled the room, soft, emotional, and alive. Every note seemed to tell a story. She watched him, completely lost in the sound. For the first time, she saw him not as the quiet office worker or the man she once teased, but as someone extraordinary, someone who had depth, purpose, and strength. When the song ended, the audience clapped loudly. He smiled, bowed slightly, and looked around the room. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers. He didn't look surprised to see her. He just nodded softly as if to say, "I knew you'd come one day." She felt something stir inside her, a mix of admiration and shame. When she left that night, the sound of his piano stayed with her. It echoed in her heart long after the music stopped. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about him. And for the first time, she looked forward to going to the office, not for work, not for the people, but to see the man who had changed her view of the world just by playing a piano. He didn't know it yet. But that moment marked the beginning of something new. His quiet life was slowly turning into a story everyone would soon talk about. The pianist who was once mocked was now admired by the very people who once laughed at him. And among them was the one person who would soon matter the most. The company was preparing for a big charity event. It was an important day. Business partners, media representatives, and local celebrities were all expected to attend. Everyone in the office was running around, fixing last-minute details, making sure things looked perfect. The event was being held in the company's grand hall, beautifully decorated with flowers, lights, and banners. The boss wanted everything to go smoothly. He was a respected man, strict but fair, and this event meant a lot to him. His daughter was helping manage it too. She wanted to make it special, not only for the company but also because it was for a cause that mattered to her. The event would raise funds for children who couldn't afford education. A live performance was planned for the evening. But just 2 days before the event, the musician who was supposed to perform canceled. Everyone panicked. The boss's daughter tried calling replacements, but all the good performers were already booked. She sat at her desk, stressed and frustrated. One of the junior staff members half-jokingly said, "Why don't we ask the guy from our office?" The one who plays piano at that restaurant? She looked up, startled. You mean him? The staff member shrugged. Well, he's good. That video of him online has thousands of views. People love him. Why not give him a chance? She thought for a moment. The idea seemed strange at first, but something about it felt right. Maybe it was her guilt, maybe curiosity. But deep down, she wanted to hear him play again. All right, she said finally. Call him in. That afternoon, he walked into her office looking calm as always. She took a breath before speaking. We need a musician for the charity event this weekend. The performer canceled. Would you be willing to play? He looked surprised but smiled politely. If you think I can help, I'd be happy to. Are you sure? She asked. It's a big event. There will be a large audience, he nodded. Music sounds the same no matter who listens. She smiled at that. Then it settled. I'll have someone coordinate with you. When he left the room, she sat back in her chair thinking about his words. There was something so peaceful about him. No excitement, no arrogance, just quiet confidence. The next few days passed quickly. The staff decorated the hall with care. A grand piano was placed on the stage, polished and shining under the lights. The guest list was long, and everyone was dressed in elegant clothes. By evening, the hall filled with the sound of soft chatter and laughter. He arrived early, wearing a plain black suit. It wasn't expensive, but it fit him well. He greeted the technicians politely and tested the piano. The sound was perfect. As he sat there, warming up his fingers, a few people glanced his way, whispering. Some recognized him from the viral video. The boss's daughter walked over to check the arrangements. When she saw him on stage, her heart skipped for a moment. He looked completely at ease, lost in his own quiet world. You ready? She asked softly. He nodded. Always. As the evening began, the host introduced several speakers who talked about the charity's goals and achievements. Then came the moment for the music performance. The lights dimmed slightly and the host announced, Please welcome a very special performer, someone whose music has touched many hearts. He sat at the piano, the crowd quieting around him. For a second, the hall fell completely still. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft, like a whisper. The melody rose slowly, gentle yet full of emotion. His hands moved gracefully across the keys, and soon the music filled the hall. It was the kind of sound that made people forget where they were. Conversations stopped. Glasses were set down. Even those who didn't care much for music found themselves drawn to it. Every note carried feeling, sadness, hope, and peace all mixed together. It was as if he was telling a story without words. The boss's daughter stood near the back, watching him. Her eyes began to sting. She couldn't explain why, but the music touched something deep inside her. She thought about how she once laughed at him, and now here he was, holding an entire crowd in silence with just his piano. When he reached the final part of the song, the melody changed. It became brighter, lighter, full of warmth. It was like the sound of sunlight after rain. When he played the last note, there was a long silence before the entire hall burst into applause. People stood up, clapping loudly. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" He smiled humbly, bowing his head slightly. The applause went on and on. The boss, sitting in the front row, turned to his daughter with a look of admiration. "He's extraordinary," he whispered. She nodded slowly, unable to speak. After the performance, people came to meet him. Guests shook his hand, praising his music. The media took pictures, asking questions. "Where did you learn to play like that? Do you perform professionally?" He answered politely but never bragged. "I just love music," he said simply. Later that night, when the event ended and most guests had left, he stayed back to help the staff move some equipment. The boss's daughter walked up to him, still a bit emotional from what she had heard. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "You made everyone feel something special tonight," he smiled. "I'm glad the music helped." She hesitated before speaking again. "When I said those things before, I really didn't know who you were." "I'm sorry." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "It's all right. Sometimes people need to laugh before they can listen." Her eyes softened. "You're a kind man." He shook his head lightly. "Just someone who loves what he does." They stood there in silence for a moment, the lights dim around them, the piano gleaming softly under the last bit of stage light. "Would you ever consider teaching?" she asked suddenly. "I've always wanted to learn piano but never really tried." He smiled. "If you're serious about learning, I'll teach you." She laughed softly. "Then it's a deal." The next week, true to her word, she started taking lessons from him after work. They met at the small restaurant where he played. At first, she struggled with the keys, often pressing the wrong notes, and every time she did, she would laugh at herself. He would smile and patiently guide her hands. "Music isn't about getting it right," he said once. "It's about feeling it." Little by little, she began to understand what he meant. It wasn't just about the piano, it was about life. She realized he had something she never had before: peace. A quiet strength that came from doing what he loved, no matter what others thought. Sometimes after lessons, they would sit and talk. She asked him about his life, his dreams, his father. He told her small pieces of his story, how his father had taught him to play, how music helped him through everything. One evening, as they were locking up, she asked, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone at work that you were so talented?" He smiled. "People see what they want to see. It's better to let them find out on their own." She nodded slowly. "They're seeing it now." Soon the company began to treat him differently. The boss personally thanked him for saving the event, even offering him a bonus. The once mocking coworkers now greeted him with smiles, some even asking for photos. But he remained the same, humble, quiet, and kind. He still came to work early, still ate his simple lunch near the window, and still played piano every night at the restaurant. The boss's daughter started visiting the restaurant more often, sometimes with her friends, sometimes alone. Her friends would whisper, "Isn't that the guy who works at your company?" She'd nod, smiling proudly. "Yes, and he's amazing." Slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. Their conversations grew warmer, their laughter easier. She admired not just his music, but his character, and for the first time she felt that maybe, just maybe, the joke she once made wasn't as funny as she thought. One evening, as they sat by the piano after the restaurant closed, she said quietly, "You remember what I said that day in the office?" He chuckled softly. "Play that piano and I'll date you?" Her face turned red. "I didn't mean it seriously back then." He smiled gently. "I know." She looked at him, her eyes shining a little. "But maybe I do now." He looked at her for a moment, then softly said, "Then I'll keep playing." They both laughed quietly, the sound mixing with the soft hum of the city outside. That night, the world felt different, warmer, calmer, full of possibility. Neither of them knew where life would take them next, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed since the day she said, "Play that piano." The days after the charity event felt different. The office atmosphere had changed. People who once barely noticed him now greeted him warmly. Some even stopped by his desk just to say, "You played beautifully that night." It was strange how quickly people's opinions could change. The same coworkers who once laughed at him now looked at him with respect, maybe even admiration. He didn't let it get to his head. Every morning he still came to work the same way, with the same calm expression, the same plain shirt and that old black bag. But deep inside something had shifted, not pride but peace. For the first time he felt seen. The boss's daughter had also changed. She visited his desk sometimes, pretending she had a work question, though her eyes gave away the truth. She simply wanted to talk to him. Their lessons continued every evening at the restaurant. She was getting better with the piano, and each time she played, her laughter filled the room. He would smile and say, "You're improving." She'd shake her head, "Only because I have a good teacher." One evening, as they sat together after her lesson, she asked softly, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone that you write music for famous singers?" He looked surprised. "How did you know?" She smiled shyly. "I looked it up. I saw your stage name in the credits of a few songs online. You wrote those, didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the piano keys and said quietly, "Yes, I did. But I never wanted people to treat me differently because of it." She nodded, understanding. "You just wanted to be normal." He smiled faintly. "Exactly. My father always said, a man's worth isn't in his money, but in his character." I guess I held on to that. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, comfortable. She admired him even more for that humility. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, and that made everything he did seem even more impressive. But the world doesn't stay quiet for long. The article about the mystery pianist began spreading fast. More people started to connect the dots. One morning, a coworker came running into the office holding her phone. "Guys, look at this. It's him." He's the mystery pianist from the charity event." The office buzzed with whispers and excitement. "You're kidding," one said. "He's famous." "I thought he just played for fun." When he walked in, everyone turned to look. He could feel the change in their eyes, curiosity mixed with awe. Some smiled nervously. Others suddenly became overly friendly. "Hey, I saw your article." "You're amazing," one said. Another added, "We always knew you were talented." He just smiled and nodded politely, not mentioning how those same voices once laughed at him. By lunchtime, even the boss had heard the news. He called him into his office. "You should have told us about your background," the boss said, shaking his head in disbelief but smiling. "You're a man of many talents. I'm proud to have someone like you here." He thanked him quietly, not knowing what else to say. But the boss's daughter, she was the one who looked at him differently now. Not because of his success, but because she understood what it meant. He wasn't just talented. He was someone who had quietly worked for years, with no need for recognition. That night at the restaurant, the crowd was bigger than ever. Cameras, lights, and people recording on their phones filled the space. The restaurant owner looked overwhelmed but proud. "You've turned my little place into something special," he said. He smiled. "This place made me who I am." When he sat down at the piano, he noticed her in the crowd. She wasn't dressed like the rich girl from the office tonight. No expensive clothes, no jewelry. Just a simple dress and a quiet smile. When their eyes met, she nodded softly as if to say, "I'm here not as a boss's daughter, but as a friend." He began to play, and as the notes filled the room, everything else faded away. The sound was soft yet full of emotion. The audience listened in silence, completely lost in the melody. Some wiped tears from their eyes. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But through all the noise, his eyes stayed on her. She smiled, clapping softly, her eyes glistening. After the show, a group of reporters approached him. "Sir, can we ask a few questions?" one said eagerly. "Your song that went viral, did you really write it years ago under another name?" He nodded calmly. "Yes, I wrote it long before anyone cared to listen." "Why didn't you take credit for it sooner?" another asked. He smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the music needs to find its way before the name behind it does." They wrote down every word, their cameras flashing. By the next day, his name was everywhere, articles, videos, interviews. People were calling him the humble millionaire pianist. He found it strange to read that word, millionaire. It didn't feel real. He still lived simply, still rode the same bus to work, still carried his old bag. But now people saw him differently. Some treated him with extra kindness, while others acted as if they'd always been close to him. A few even tried to take credit for discovering him. He didn't argue. He just let them talk. The boss's daughter noticed all of this. One afternoon, she saw a group of co-workers crowding around him, asking endless questions, trying to impress him. She smiled quietly to herself. Now they want his attention, she thought. Before, they couldn't even say his name without laughing. Later that evening, she found him sitting alone on a park bench near the restaurant. The city lights reflected off the piano shop's window across the street. She sat beside him without saying a word. "Strange how people change," he said softly, watching the passing cars. She nodded. "Yes, it's almost like they're meeting you for the first time." He smiled. "Maybe they are, but I haven't changed." "I know," she said. "That's what I like about you." He turned to her, a little surprised by her honesty. She didn't look away. There was no teasing this time, no jokes, just quiet truth. The next morning at work, he noticed how even the boss seemed more relaxed around him. He was offered a new position, one that came with higher pay and more respect. But he hesitated. Money was never his goal. When the boss asked why he seemed unsure, he replied, "I'll think about it. I just don't want to stop being who I am." That answer earned the boss's respect even more. The days passed and his music kept growing. More offers came in, interviews, invitations, collaborations. But he continued playing at the same small restaurant. "This is where my heart is," he told the owner. "If I ever stop playing here, I'll lose the reason I started." The boss's daughter often came to listen quietly. She didn't need to talk much anymore. They understood each other in silence. He would play and she would sit, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, she stayed behind while others left. The restaurant lights dimmed. and only the soft glow of the piano lamp remained. She walked up to him slowly and said, "You know, when I said those words that day, 'Play that piano and I'll date you,' I thought it was just a joke. But now, it feels like a promise I didn't understand then." He looked at her, his eyes calm but warm. "Some promises don't need to be spoken again," he said softly. "They just need time to mean something." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Then maybe the time is now." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the piano and began to play again. The music filled the quiet room, tender and full of meaning. She listened, her heart full, realizing that this man, once mocked, once invisible, had become someone she truly admired. Not for his fame, not for his wealth, but for his soul. The next day, the headlines called him the employee who played his way into everyone's heart. And indeed he had. Not just into hearts, but into people's memories, forever changing how they saw kindness, patience, and quiet strength. What started as a joke had turned into something far deeper, a story about dignity, humility, and the quiet power of a man who believed that the right music, played from the heart, could make the world listen. The weeks after the charity event were quiet in the office, but they carried a new energy. People still whispered about him, still admired him, but the man himself remained unchanged. He arrived early, left late, and worked with the same careful attention to detail he always had. The difference now was how people looked at him. Respect replaced mockery and admiration replaced indifference. The boss's daughter, however, felt something different. Every time she saw him, she remembered the day she laughed and teased. The memory now made her feel guilty but also thoughtful. She couldn't help but think about all the ways he had stayed humble, even as the world started noticing him. That humility, combined with his talent, made her heart feel something new, something she couldn't name yet. One afternoon, she found herself standing near his desk while he worked quietly. Everyone else had gone out for lunch, leaving the office almost empty. She hesitated, unsure of how to start. Finally, she said softly, I want to apologize again." He looked up, calm as ever. "You don't need to," he said quietly. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I do. I shouldn't have laughed at you. I shouldn't have joined the others. I judged you before I even knew you. I was wrong." He smiled faintly, his eyes gentle. "Everyone learns in their own time. What matters is what you do after that." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, but her gaze didn't leave his. "I want to make it right. I want to understand you, not just the music, but everything about who you are." He nodded slowly. "I don't mind sharing a little of my story, but only if you listen without judgment," she promised, and he began. He told her about his childhood, about learning the piano with his father, about the long hours spent practicing alone, and about how he sold his compositions under another name, just to survive and keep his music alive. He spoke softly, his words calm, but they carried weight. Every sentence seemed to hold years of patience, quiet struggles, and a determination she hadn't expected. She listened in silence, captivated. Every story revealed another layer of his life, another reason to admire him. She had teased him before, laughed at him, even joined others in mocking him, but hearing his story, seeing the way he had persevered quietly, made her ashamed of her past behavior. When he finished, she finally spoke. "I don't know what to say. You've been through so much, and I didn't even see it. I can't believe I judged you like that." He shook his head gently. "It's in the past. What matters is now. But it still hurts me," she admitted. "I laughed at someone I should have respected. And not just that, I think I've been noticing you for a long time and I didn't even realize it." He looked at her quietly as if weighing his words. Then he said softly, "Sometimes the heart notices things before the mind does. That's not your fault." Her cheeks warmed and she looked away. I want to be someone who deserves to be around you. Someone who sees the real you, not just the talent." He smiled faintly. "The real me is just someone who loves music and tries to be kind. That's all. Anyone who appreciates that is already close enough." The conversation ended with a quiet understanding between them. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a start. A bond had formed, built on honesty and shared humanity rather than appearances or wealth. Their friendship grew naturally over the following days. She began to visit him at the restaurant more often, sometimes bringing a book to read while he played, sometimes just sitting quietly and listening. She noticed how people responded to him, not with awe or envy, but with genuine warmth. Even strangers were drawn to him, captivated by his music and his presence. One evening, after he finished playing a particularly emotional piece, she stayed behind longer than usual. The restaurant had emptied and the lights were dim. She walked over and sat across from him at the piano. "You know," she said softly, "I never expected music to make me feel like this. Not just the songs, but the way you play them." He looked at her, a gentle smile on his face. "Music is just a mirror. It reflects what's already inside. Sometimes it shows us things we didn't know we had." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "And sometimes," she whispered, "it makes us realize what we've been missing." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he began to play again softly, a melody that seemed to float through the air. She listened, letting the sound fill her completely. Every note felt like a story, every pause like a heartbeat. She realized then that she didn't just admire him, she respected him deeply, and something more was growing quietly in her heart. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. They shared small moments, walking together after work, talking about their dreams, sharing simple meals, and laughing over little mistakes during piano lessons. She learned more about his life, his values, his quiet struggles, and his moments of doubt. He learned about her world, the pressures she felt as the boss's daughter, her insecurities, and the expectations she carried silently. One afternoon, as they walked along a quiet street after a lesson, she said, "Do you ever feel like people only see what they want to see? That they don't notice the person underneath?" He glanced at her, thoughtful. "All the time. But that's why you have to stay true to yourself. If you keep being who you are, the right people will notice eventually." She looked at him, realizing that he wasn't just talking about music. He was talking about life, about character, about the choices that defined a person. And she realized that she had learned more from him in a few weeks than she had in years of social expectations. One evening, she stayed late at the restaurant again. He was playing softly, the last customers gone and the quiet hum of the city outside blending with the piano. She sat at the corner table, her hands folded in her lap, watching him. After the final note, she approached him. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about everything. About how I treated you, about how I felt. I want to start over. Not just apologize, but really start over." He paused, then smiled gently. "You don't need to earn a second chance with me. We can just be ourselves." "That's enough," she shook her head. "No, I want more than that. I want to show you I respect you, that I understand you. I want to be someone who matters in your life, not just someone who laughs at a joke." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let's take it one step at a time. That's the only way anyone learns to be close." Her smile widened, soft and genuine. "One step at a time." From that day, their friendship deepened into something tender and meaningful. They spent evenings together at the restaurant, not just for lessons or music, but for conversation, for shared stories, for the comfort of simply being with someone who understood them. She began to see him differently, not as the quiet office worker, not as the viral pianist, not even as the man whose compositions had touched thousands, but as someone remarkable for the person he was. Kind, patient, humble, and strong in ways that didn't need to be announced to the world, and he in turn began to notice her in ways he hadn't before. Not for her wealth, her beauty, or her social position, but for her sincerity, her curiosity, and the way she genuinely wanted to understand him. He appreciated her honesty, her willingness to see him for who he truly was, and her willingness to learn not just piano, but life lessons from someone she had once judged. They started to spend more time together outside the lessons. Small things, walking in the park, sharing meals at simple cafes, watching the sunset over the city, became moments that neither of them wanted to end. She laughed easily around him, no longer trying to impress, no longer afraid to be herself. He shared stories, sometimes small, sometimes profound, teaching her patience, humility, and the quiet joy of life's simple moments. One evening, after closing the restaurant, they sat together on the steps outside. The night air was cool, filled with the distant hum of the city. She looked at him and said softly, I think I've been waiting to meet someone like you all my life." He looked at her quietly, then smiled. "And I think I've been waiting for someone who truly sees me, not just my music. For a long moment they sat in silence, feeling the truth in each other's words. The past, the teasing, the mockery, the judgments was far behind them. What mattered now was the connection they had built, slowly, patiently, and honestly. And in that quiet moment, both of them realized that something precious had begun, a bond rooted in respect, admiration, and the quiet promise of love, waiting to grow with every shared note and every tender word. The company announced a grand end-of-year celebration. It was going to be bigger than any previous event, with everyone in the office invited along with business partners and special guests. The hall was decorated elegantly, full of lights, flowers, and a polished stage. Music was promised for the evening, but this time it wasn't a last-minute plan. Everyone knew who the performer would be. The quiet pianist from the office, the man who had been mocked and overlooked for years, would now play for everyone in the company, for those who had once laughed at him, and for those who had quietly watched and admired. On the evening of the event, the hall buzzed with excitement. Employees dressed in suits and gowns, conversations overlapping, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Yet amidst all the noise, he sat quietly backstage, adjusting the bench, his fingers hovering above the piano keys. He wasn't nervous. He never was. Music had always been his safe place, and tonight was no different. The boss's daughter approached him smiling. She wore a simple dress that suited her perfectly. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I've waited for this moment," she smiled, though there was a hint of nerves in her eyes. She knew this performance was more than just music. It was the culmination of years of patience, quiet perseverance, and finally recognition. When it was time, the announcer introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice echoed through the hall, "we have a very special performance tonight. Please welcome someone whose music has already touched thousands of hearts, our very own pianist." Applause filled the room as he walked to the stage. For a moment he glanced back and saw the audience, co-workers who had once mocked him, business partners who had never noticed him, and the boss's daughter watching quietly, her eyes bright with anticipation. He sat at the piano and took a deep breath. The first notes floated into the air, soft and delicate. The hall went silent, as if every person present was holding their breath. His fingers moved gracefully, creating a melody that carried a story, one of struggle, patience, and quiet triumph. Every note told of years spent practicing alone, of laughter that once hurt but never broke him, of dreams nurtured in secret. As the music swelled, he noticed faces in the crowd shifting. Some eyes widened in awe, others were moist with tears. Even the co-workers who had teased him before looked stunned, realizing for the first time that the man they had dismissed was extraordinary, not just for his talent, but for his character. The melody turned gentle, almost like a whisper drawing the audience in. He played with feeling that went beyond skill. It was as if he poured his soul into each note. Every pause and every rise carried meaning. People leaned forward, unable to look away, unable to blink, caught in the story the piano was telling. He played his original compositions, some familiar from the viral video, others entirely new. Each song was a journey, and by the time the final piece began, the audience was completely captivated. Even the boss's daughter felt her heart tighten with every chord. She remembered the first day she had laughed at him, and how far he had come since then. Now here he was, performing not for recognition, but because music was who he was. The last song ended with a long, delicate note that lingered in the air. Silence followed for a heartbeat, and then applause erupted, louder than anything he had ever heard. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The hall was alive with appreciation, admiration, and awe. He bowed slightly, not showing any pride, only gratitude. When he looked out, he saw co-workers smiling sincerely, the boss nodding in respect, and the boss's daughter clapping softly, her eyes glistening. After the applause died down, the boss walked onto the stage. "I think we can all agree," he said, voice strong but warm, "that we've underestimated someone for far too long. Today we witness not just talent, but dedication, humility, and heart. Thank you for showing us all the power of music and the strength of character." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Some people rushed forward to shake his hand, others took photos. Yet he stayed calm, polite, and unhurried. He had never needed the applause, but it felt good to be truly seen. The boss's daughter finally stepped onto the stage beside him. She hesitated, then said softly, I should have never laughed at you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. You've taught me more about patience and strength than I ever expected. He looked at her, warmth in his eyes. It's all right. What matters is what we do after we realize our mistakes. She smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration. And I want to be someone who truly knows you, not just your music. He nodded, understanding her completely. Then we'll take our time. That's the best way to know someone. After the event, as the hall emptied and the staff began packing up, they stayed behind. The music from earlier still echoed in the empty space, a reminder of the night's magic. They walked outside together into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of street lamps. You know, she said softly, I never imagined I'd feel like this after seeing you perform. I've admired you for so long, but tonight, it feels different, stronger. He glanced at her, a gentle smile forming. Music has a way of doing that. It reaches the places words cannot. They walked slowly, side by side. Neither rushed. Neither needed to. The air was filled with a quiet understanding, a shared peace. They had been through laughter, mistakes, recognition, and patience. And now finally they could just be together without pretense. In the following weeks their bond continued to grow. She joined him for casual piano sessions, helping others at the restaurant, learning not just the notes, but the emotion behind them. He guided her, teaching her more than just music, teaching her how to listen, how to feel, how to appreciate small moments. At work, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The employees who once mocked him now treated him with sincere respect. They asked for advice, sought his opinions, and included him in projects they never had before. He remained humble through it all, treating everyone with the same calm, polite demeanor he always had. One afternoon, the boss called him into the office. I want to offer you a permanent position leading a creative team. You'll have freedom to explore projects, compose music, and even mentor others if you wish. He considered it carefully, then smiled. I'll do it, but I want to keep playing at the restaurant. That's where I feel most alive. The boss nodded, understanding completely. You deserve to do what makes you happy. The bond between him and the boss's daughter continued to deepen. They spent quiet evenings walking, talking, and playing music together. Laughter came easily, silence was comfortable, and every moment strengthened the connection that had begun months before. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a small park near the city, she said softly, I think I've been waiting for someone like you all my life. Someone who sees the world differently. Someone who understands without needing words. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. And I've been waiting for someone who sees me for who I truly am, not just for the music or the applause. She smiled, reaching for his hand. Then maybe we can start our story properly without jokes or misunderstandings. He squeezed her hand gently. One note at a time, one step at a time. That's how the best music is made, and the best relationships too. Months passed and their connection grew stronger. She learned piano. He shared stories of his compositions, and together they found joy in the simple moments of life. The world outside might have been loud, busy, and full of opinions, but for them, quiet understanding was enough. Eventually, the office and the restaurant became two worlds where he lived fully. One where people knew him for his talent, and one where people knew him for his heart. She was there in both worlds, laughing with him, learning with him, and sharing the peace that came from being truly seen. The man who had once been mocked and overlooked now stood in a place of recognition and admiration, not because he sought it, but because he had stayed true to himself. And the woman who had once teased him learned the value of humility, patience, and the quiet strength of someone who never needed to prove themselves. One evening, as they sat together at the restaurant after closing, she whispered, Do you remember the day I said those words in the office? He chuckled softly. Play that piano and I'll date you? How could I forget? She laughed too, softly, her eyes glistening. I was wrong to say it then. But somehow it led us here. He smiled, looking at her gently. Sometimes the mistakes we make lead us to the right places. That day you laughed, but it started a journey neither of us will forget. And so, the story ended not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with quiet understanding, shared music, and a bond that had grown from respect, patience, and love. The man who had been mocked had played his way into the hearts of everyone, and the woman who had laughed had learned to truly see, the beauty in someone else's soul. The piano stayed in the restaurant, polished and ready, just like the quiet moments they shared. And every time he played, it told a story not just of music but of life, humility, and the power of being patient enough to let the right person notice you for who you really are. And in that music, in that quiet space filled with understanding and respect, they found something lasting, something deeper than words, brighter than fame, and more meaningful than any